I just tweeted this morning to the real Donald Trump. You know, what do you call it? / real Donald Trump, about having a Rose Garden ceremony. It probably won't happen, but I'm not going to give up. Okay, Dean, thank you very much for the introduction, and more importantly, for the warm welcome you've given me, not only at this meeting, but so many meetings where I've had a chance to address people one-on-one, or a small group of people, or a large group like this. It's always a pleasure to be with you. This year, I'm proud that the Senate National Whistleblower Appreciation Day resolution is co-sponsored by the entire Senate Whistleblower Protection Caucus. The text of our resolution quotes a much earlier one, can you believe it, dated July 30th, 1778, from the Continental Congress. On that date, the representatives of the 13 colonies recognized the courageous contribution of whistleblowers aboard the warship Warren. The whistleblower had sent one of their own, the captain of the Marines, to present their petition describing wrongdoing by the commander of the Continental Navy. The Congress responded by suspending the Commodore from his post and by passing the first whistleblower protection law. This resolution said this, quote, "It is the duty of all persons in the service of the United States to give the earliest information to Congress or other proper authority of any misconduct, frauds, or misdemeanors committed by any officers or persons in the service of these states," end quote. So celebrating and honoring people like you, or advocates for whistleblowers like you folks are, in our country is not new. It's a time-honored American tradition and literally as old as the Republic. Now, when I say time-honored, timely, but not always honored. And we have this gathering here today to honor whistleblowers, as we should. Since that time, back in 1778, Congress has sought to protect, honor, and reward whistleblowers. Not enough, however. It's not just the right thing to do, it's a sensible thing to do. Whistleblowers, like those sailors on the ship Warren, know where to find the waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. History has shown us over and over again how much our country needs whistleblowers. In 1863, nearly 90 years after this first resolution Congress passed, then in 1863, the Lincoln's Law was passed to help fight massive fraud on the Union Army during the Civil War. The law, we now call it the False Claims Act, empowers private citizens to sue corrupt contractors on the taxpayers' behalf. For their pain, these citizen whistleblowers would receive a portion of what the government recovered from the wrongdoer. And it worked. Empowering these whistleblowers to prosecute fraud proved to be smarter, faster, and more effective than just relying on government. Now, that shouldn't surprise any of us. In 1986, those provisions inspired my modern amendments to the False Claims Act to restore the power of whistleblowers to help the government fight fraud. The results speak for themselves and speak very loudly. From 1987 to 2017, that's 30 years of that law, the federal government has recovered more than $56 billion through False Claims Act. 72% of that came from actions initiated by whistleblowers. So you know how important whistleblowing is when it comes to saving the taxpayers' money. And you don't know how early on in the False Claims Act being administered by earlier departments of justice? How many of them took every opportunity they could to say that this whistleblower might not be entitled to the money? I remember one important case in the late 80s or early 90s in Ohio where a district judge called in somebody that was for the U.S. attorney and said something along the lines when this attorney was arguing that this whistleblower, this key TAM person, should not be allowed to get X number of dollars or as much. And they said, do you realize that you wouldn't even have a case if this person hadn't come forward? Now, 72% of the money's been recovered from people like that. After a period of time now, I don't find fault with the Justice Department on whistleblower claims from that point of view, but from the point of view of their slowness sometimes to join into a case, I still find fault. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat administration or Department of Justice. What does matter is that somehow somebody just doesn't want to give credit where credit's due. And I think that 72% figure makes it pretty clear that people like you, or if some of you are here advocates and not really a whistleblower, whatever you're involved in, you know that that's where the information comes from. It ought to be encouraged, not depressed as sometimes. Tens of billions of dollars, in other words, once lost to fraud, has been returned to the federal treasury, all because of whistleblowers. You'll hear from one of these whistleblowers today. He will tell you about how he saw his bosses knowingly put police officers in danger. Dr. Aaron Westrick will tell you his story of blowing the whistle on body armor manufacturers who sold defective vests to federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. And you'll hear these vests were anything but bulletproof. Within 2 weeks of each other in 2003, 2 police officers were critically wounded when vests made by these companies failed. 1 officer died. The other was permanently injured. This year, Dr. Westrick's case finally came to an end when all the defendants settled. Now, why should it take that long when something's so obviously wrong to finally get justice to a person that wants to save people's lives? Well, when that happened, this is what Dr. Westrick said. I lost my job and career. I have no regrets. I would blow the whistle again. When you don't listen to whistleblowers like Dr. Westrick, that's when the regrets come. Because of his remarkable courage, the product was pulled from the market and no doubt countless lives saved. But think about this. What if his company had listened to him in the first place? Times would have turned out very differently for the 2 brave officers whose vests failed them. Oh, and by the way, because of his case, the government recovered more than $67 million in lost funds and damages. Because of the whistleblowers like Dr. Westrick, the False Claims Act is the most effective tool we have to fight government fraud. And finally, well, maybe I should say just finally, maybe over the last 10 or 15 years out of the 30 that it's been in effect, the Justice Department's finally saying that in their press releases. So they assume that whistleblowers, I should say opponents tend to be, opponents of false claims law tend to be very skeptical about whether these reward provisions are justified or not in some cases, and I've already spoken to that, so I won't go into detail about it. But these people that are opponents assume whistleblowers are motivated by self-interest or greed, and the rewards just encourage bad behavior. But the reward programs are not about what whistleblowers gain by blowing the whistle. They're about everything that whistleblowers stand to lose. The truth is that whistleblowers are so ostracized and reviled, they suffer retaliation for speaking out. You sometimes have heard me use these words: whistleblowers are about as welcome as a skunk at a picnic. In lots of cases, it costs them their livelihood and their reputations. And if they get fired, they can't just go out and get another job, because oftentimes they're blacklisted. So they encourage huge legal costs at the same time. They lose their income, maybe for a long period of time. Hey, let me digress here just for a minute and quit reading. I told you I tweeted about this to the real Donald Trump. I'm telling you that whistleblowers would have less of a problem if the President of the United States, and I'm talking about any president, because I've had this conversation with 8 presidents, from the top of the bureaucracy, which is the chief executive, the President of the United States, to the lowest levels. And maybe there's no low levels in government service because it's all public service, and it ought to be honored. But whatever it is, from the president on down, then wouldn't everybody managing people in government understand that whistleblowing is pretty important? And wouldn't that be better off, government be better off, if we had more people who know where the skeletons are buried, if they would do it? And I won't tell you which president this was, but I was on Air Force once, more than once, but this time I had an opportunity to be on one-on-one with the president. And I said, you ought to have a Rose Garden ceremony and honor these people. And you know what the answer was? Well, if we did that, we would have 3,000 whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork. Well, that's just exactly the purpose of my suggesting it to him. We'd get more of you people coming out of the woodwork. Now let me get back to my text if I can remember where I left off. So these people encourage huge legal costs. At the same time, they lose their income, and maybe for a long time. The whistleblower reward provisions don't just provide an incentive for them to step forward. In many cases, the rewards are there to make them whole for the retaliation that they suffer. It just makes sense. The government would never know all the ways it was getting ripped off without these whistleblowers. So whatever the government recovers because of their information, whistleblowers ought to receive their share of that. That's the model behind the whistleblower program at the Securities and Exchange Commission and at the Internal Revenue Service. And it works. Since their creation, these programs have netted more than $975 million and $3.6 billion, respectively, in recovery sanctions, disgorgements, and revenue loss to tax fraud. Clearly, when these agencies work with whistleblowers, they succeed. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and that's what Congress is supposed to be doing. Every step of the way, I've been doing oversight on these programs and pushing them to do even better. They need to complete their investigations and make timely and complete award determinations. In that vein, I'm pleased that earlier this year, Congress passed my amendments to ensure IRS whistleblowers are not shortchanged. My amendments clarified that the pot of recovered funds the IRS uses as a basis for whistleblower awards known as collected proceeds includes unpaid taxes under Title 26 and fines and penalties collected under criminal and civil cases. It's only fair because none of these proceeds would have been collected without the whistleblower's help. Congress also approved my amendments to end the double taxation of Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower awards. Now whistleblowers don't have to worry about paying taxes on their legal fees. Even with these welcome changes, our oversight work is never done. So I'm still pursuing much needed improvements to the IRS whistleblower program. Earlier this month, provisions I authored were included in bipartisan tax administration legislation introduced by Chairman Hatch. These reforms are aimed at increasing communications with whistleblowers. They authorize status updates and clarify that the IRS can share information with whistleblowers to advance investigations. Most importantly, the reforms would provide protections for IRS whistleblowers from employer retaliation for the first time. I'm also actively engaged in getting to the bottom of the Securities and Exchange Commission's proposed new rules for its whistleblower program. It is vitally important that whistleblowers who are making the difference in the SEC investigations every day are awarded that what Congress has determined they're entitled to. The SEC cannot arbitrarily decide what it thinks is quote unquote appropriate for a whistleblower to receive. I'll tell you what's appropriate. You've heard the old saying, let the punishment fit the crime. Well, let the award in these cases truly fit the whistleblower's contribution, because there would be no recoveries in these cases if there were no whistleblowers. That's just how the system works, and the opposite is true. Going after waste, fraud, and abuse without whistleblowers is about as useful as harvesting an acre of corn. I'm a farmer, so you know where I'm coming from, with a rusty pair of scissors. That applies across the board to bad behavior by corporations as well as wrongdoing by our own government. Many of you have also blown the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse in agencies, some of the very same agencies that go after fraud in the private sector. Your courage has helped us in Congress fulfill our constitutional duty of oversight and ensure government is truly accountable to the people we're supposed to be serving, no matter the source of the wrongdoing. Whistleblowers who give the earliest information, as Congress said in 1778, about it, quote, to Congress or other proper authority, deserve our profound gratitude. In its 1778 resolution, Continental Congress recognized the true value of whistleblowers in our democracy. In our 2018 resolutions, today the Senate will proclaim exactly the same thing. But that is not enough. I've been asking every president since Ronald Reagan. I'm repeating something, but it's written down here, so just be patient. I've been asking every president since Ronald Reagan to hold a Rose Garden ceremony to honor these brave men and women. Not a single one of them has taken me up on it. Just think about it. Tens of billions of dollars in funds lost to fraud and corruption have been recovered. Untold amounts of government waste and misconduct have been exposed. It's all about whistleblowers doing their job. I think it's about time that the president joined the rest of us here in saying thank you. This president ought to be very willing to do it because he has come to Washington to make changes. He wants to drain the swamp, and there's nobody that can help drain the swamp, anybody more than people like you who are whistleblowers, who are willing to say something's wrong because you're just politically conscious and not only politically conscious, but you're very proud of being an American. You just want government to do what government's supposed to be doing and spending the money the way the government wants it to work. So I'm going to say thank you. I had two more sentences, but I'm going to pass them on. Hey, I'm taking some of your papers with me here. Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you.